Thank you. So we're doing pretty well for time, but maybe I'll start off with the Q&A from the audience. Any questions for the panel? No?
I have a question.
Sure.
Peter, I love your comments all the way through. I think it's a very rational approach, and it really is how capital markets look at the world. And I just wanted to say that we had a very close friend who, very bright guy, very successful business guy. He started Stance in California. He's just killing it. But he did an analysis of all the companies that actually went public, the ones who made it. So these aren't all the ones who never did make it. And he looked at all of their original projections, those beautiful hockey sticks. Not one company hit that 5-year into that profitability. Not one of the companies that made it. Google took 10 years. So I think it's just a great cautionary tale for all entrepreneurs, and that when you're talking to people like Braintree, that you got to be really careful understanding models and how you approach the world. So it's more. So if you want to add something to that, that'd be great.
I would.
Yeah. Let's be careful with this.
Check. Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you that a lot of companies start out with a hockey stick and think they're going to become profitable within that 5-year range, which, frankly, most investors want to see. So that's why it's sort of in there. I would, also add to that, though, that you need to think about sort of two things when you're setting up your capital structure. I mean, firstly, if you're successful and you can find other successful opportunities to deploy capital, then you may forego that profitability to get there. You mentioned Google. I mean, look at Amazon. I mean, Amazon is, I think, the most unbelievable capital market story of all time from that perspective. It was over 20 years that they were unprofitable and started as a bookstore, right? So that speaks to be prepared to shift and evolve. But I think the other is to set up your capital plan with some optionality that you can go attract capital again, and you can prove through milestones that you've made achievements throughout. Because if you go to an investor and you say, we'll be profitable in 3 years, don't worry about it, and either they invest or they don't invest, but you want to go back there because they tend to be, they're your audience. You go back and you say, now can I have some money? They're going to say, well, are you profitable? And you're going to say, no, but we're going to be, right? Well, all of a sudden you've lost a certain amount of credibility. And so not all of your milestones need to be about profitability. Profitability is not the only objective that an investor has or is the benchmark that particularly growth-oriented businesses need to work towards. So be clear about what those milestones are. Maybe it's about customer acquisition. Maybe it's tons of production or sales. Maybe it's different product lines that you've developed and you're sort of on target from that perspective. I think that still will speak to investors and will allow you to attract more capital that you may need because you haven't hit that profitability and you can't cash flow yourself.
Yeah, great comments. Any other questions from the floor? Okay. Perry?
I'm hearing a bit of a mixed message about ESG. In one instance, I hear you got to take it quite seriously. In another instance, I hear that's a bunch of media hype. Does anybody want to provide any more elaboration? Because each of you are representing sort of a different sector, and I'm wondering whether or not any sector takes it more seriously than another. Chris, you want to jump into that?
Sure. We have a business line in ESG. So as a consulting firm, we definitely think it's important because we have solutions that will help you there. That being said, there is a reality that financial institutions are looking at environment, sustainability, governance, those components as a way that they look at investing. I'm not convinced, personally, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the firm at this point, that at a emerging industry level, when you're looking for financing, that's going to be the most critical thing that you need to have in your business plan, and you're going to lead with ESG when you're looking for financing or funding. Which brings me back to a bit what Peter was saying a second ago is, and ESG is just one of these things, you need to know who you're asking for funding from or investment from and tailor the ask to that organization. If you're talking to an institutional investor that is out of Europe and climate change and those pieces are absolutely critical to the way that they invest, ESG is really frickin' important. If you're talking to a VC in Alberta where they're looking to invest in emerging growth markets or places, it isn't as important. So you need to understand who you are looking for funding or investment from and tailor your ask to that organization. And that's no different than when doing a grant application or looking at funding. Often we'll look at government forms and say, well, that's silly. That doesn't make sense. We don't want to emphasize that because that's not what we think is important. If it's on the form, fill it out. So make sure you're tailoring your message to the people that you're looking for, and ESG is just one of those things. It's important if it's important to the organization that you're trying to get investment or funding from. If it's not important to them, it's not as important to you in what you're putting in front of you. This conversation's about finding ways to invest, get capital, emerge, grow your businesses. In a different conversation, talk about whether ESG should be recognized and pushed by the government and by banking institutions. Completely different conversation, and I don't know that solving it in this room will help that conversation today.
Now I have a mic, so I guess I'll say a few things. I guess the only other, I guess why I brought it up as a theme is the environmental and social responsibility themes that are driving a lot of investment decisions. And the reality is you are seeing clean tech funds, you're seeing more interest. I mean, there's now energy transition funds here in Alberta. A couple of them have set up very recently. And so if I understand hemp and it as sort of a technology opportunity, I understand it's a plant, but the reality is everything that comes from it is a new technology. And I would say that it is checking two big boxes for where capital is flowing and where new opportunity is being created out of a desire to meet climate change objectives and emission objectives and those sorts of things. So it's that environmental and social responsibility piece that I do think is driving more and more investment decision. But yeah, I wouldn't lead my pitch deck with we're going to change the world, even though I think if the things that are being talked about here happen, it will.
Any other comments?
I guess I'll just add to that from a banking perspective. I think hemp has obviously an environmentally friendly advantage, and from a sustainability standpoint, when I look at all the products that are talked about, we're talking about disrupting existing industries, and it all comes down to costs. So you can have a great story, but if your product is twice as much as your competing product, it's not gonna be enough to overcome that. So I think that's a big part of it, right?
Anton, any comments? No? Okay. Dan?
Who wants to take that one? I'll take it. No, it's a great question.
I would say previously to join our agriculture team, I was on our diversified markets, which it would include some of those industries as well. And really what's worked, and if you go back to really 5 C's and how we look at things, is emerging industries may not have, the debt serviceability, the EBITDA that traditional institutions look for, but really looking at capitalization and a really solid plan to get to that at that point. Because yes, there'll be negative EBITDA. Yes, there are loan payments because banks are very different versus like a Raintree or the equity investors where they're looking a little bit more long-term for growth. But we want to have a fixed term of where we get our money back, and our coupon rate is really our return. Having said that, we've done deals in diversified and we have taken some of those learnings where the capital is there to be patient. So we've almost kind of looked like it as an investor, as long as the capitalization is there and we have a solid plan that can be backed up with tangibles to say in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, we will hit that EBITDA mark. That's something we can look at as a mitigation, because for us as financial institutions, we can't go from risk avoidance in a new industry. We have to look at risk mitigation.
Going back to what I said about Perry early on, Perry's been shouting into a vacuum in this province for 20 years. Only up until recently did the province seem to take it seriously that we needed to innovate and evolve and move off of the energy sector, avoiding being the Appalachians of the North. So I think part of the reason there aren't a lot of success stories yet is because as a province we haven't really focused on it. I think grassroots initiatives like this, clustering, is working, and we're starting to see it in the infotech sector or tech sector, where just now you're starting to hear about growth-oriented businesses attracting capital into the province. You're seeing people retool in terms of getting into the skills that are required for infotech. I think that's a big issue that we're now overcoming, and quite frankly, the province seems to be backing that up with real dollars. So, where there's a gap in that risk capital space, government is seemingly stepping into it, and I do think that's important, because private industry or private investors aren't going to fill that whole gap, not at this stage in Canada's capital market.
At the risk of having the entire room come after me, the federal government actually is doing something good. And the Protein Industries Canada is a good example of that. If you want to look at a model for something that has been working to get money into the marketplace and putting funding into protein-related industries, have we seen the results of that? No, because the program is fairly new. But they did just reinvest in it in the latest budget, and will be continuing to invest in that particular piece of the protein supercluster. So I think that is an example of where government can lend a hand in helping move from emerging into a more robust industries. And the province is also doing things like that. The announcements today are an example of that. And so I do think there are examples where there is well-placed programming to help emerging markets, and we're doing better, as you've said, Peter. It's better now than it's been in a number of years.
Yeah, I think one point I'd add on there as well is I think there is some parallel to the startup of the oil sands in a way, right? I mean, if you look back to the 70s and 80s, right, you had a big resource that everybody knew was there, but it was everybody knew it was also very capital intensive and required different technological approaches. That sat idle for a long, long time, and it really took government stepping up to create a new royalty structure that really prompted investment and shared some of the risk of oil sands development. It even took the government coming in and taking direct equity positions in projects. So it took the government realizing that this is a strategic industry, talking about the oil sands, that they wanted to support, and really had to admit to themselves that it just the structures that were in place at that time didn't work. And they made those changes, and oil sands, right or wrong, has turned into a massive industry. But there's no way that it would have happened without that government support and changing, the fiscal terms to nurture the industry.
You got two questions.
Yep.
I'll ask my first one. I'm Kevin from Northern Protein. We're building a $160 million plant. I think one thing that we've had is that protein and hemp is very similar here. We're talking in the hundreds of millions of dollars of investment here, similar to the oil sands, as Andrew said. My question is how are the institutions and that you guys represent up there are pivoting on that? We're not talking about tech, we're not talking about drones. We're talking about real products that will change the manufacturing process in this province significantly. And, my team right now is over in Europe raising the money because in Canada here, we don't have that situation. We don't have that situation in this province. And believe me, we've talked to a lot of people, but we're trying to stay Canadian, and we want to have an answer out of you guys in terms of, when are you going to come on board? This is 160, we talked today, it's $200 million. We need the financial community in this province to recognize it. If we want to catch up to the Manitoba, right? If we want to catch up to even to the Saskatchewan, we've got to change the dynamics and not talk about the tech side. The tech side is fantastic. They're doing their job. But it doesn't produce revenue for the farmer. What produces revenue is developing up that value chain, which is expensive and very capital intensive. So that's my question.
Well, I'm not answering this one.
Sure. Okay, I'll take the first stab. Thanks for that. I know we are. So it might as well. So I would say for when we get on board is I'll address the first thing on technology. There's a lot of comparables across the globe. So we're already evolving how we're already looking at credit. So before a couple of years ago, if we're going to talk on the protein side of it, maybe unproven, maybe something that we don't look at. Today, we have a lot of comparables to look and validate a lot of the technology as your team is over in Europe, right? For something like that, like land and building, those are something that are pretty standard that we can get behind already today, right? Where it comes down to is overall in Canada, there's a limitation on the resale value of some of the equipment that is either imported or fabricated through subsidiaries here in Canada. So every single time where there is hesitation from the institutions is we're almost looking for perfection. However, part of our evolution as a financial institution is, if we want to grow something, it won't always be perfect, right? And that's where understanding, can we de-riskify the technology? I can probably say, yeah, we're probably there at that point today, right? Can we look at, the collateral from a building perspective? Yes, we can. Can we look to mitigate, some of the contracts who may be brand new in a different jurisdiction if you're going to export? Well, that's where Export Development Canada comes in to either ensure those receivables or, help with their export guarantee program. So there are ways to de-riskify some of this capital today to get behind it, but we also still need that equity piece of it because there is a point of what if something doesn't go to plan in that business plan that we're reading, right? How do we look to, again, not avoid the risk, but how do we look to mitigate that, right? And sometimes one of the best ways to mitigate is we have the patient capital, the run room to say if something doesn't go wrong if something goes wrong in our plan, then we have the run room to, not really a mistake, but be able to weather and take those learnings to develop and continue to grow as a company. So hopefully that answers your question.
Just a point on that.
Sure.
And so I've been heavily involved in financial markets, raising money, and the discussions on that. When I go down to the U.S. and the EU, when we're having those discussions, it's a totally different story. The story is we're coming in on the equity side, we're interested on this, you got to do this is your checklist. Right? When we talk about equity here, we don't even get that engagement on agriculture. And I know Andrew's probably going to the same path. And hemp has been around for 30 years, right? The regulations were, 90s or 80s? Mary Jones, right? So that's what I'm saying, is that it's just that getting that same equity investment that we have in the oil and gas sector and moving that into
comments?
The only thing I'll add to that, there, Kevin, is why we put everything in agriculture, to understand it from basically farm to finished product, right? So to understand when we look at a credit memo in this space, there's two sides to it. There's a business component to it of the value add, right? Whether it's on the offtake agreements, LOIs, whatever that is, running the business day to day. But there is an important part in also understanding the agrology behind it, understanding on the farm, understanding that supply side as well. And for us as ATB, we're a provincial bank. We want to make sure to keep as many things as local as possible. I do understand the frustration. We've heard it time and time again, and it's to continuously listen, have these conversations, and how do we innovate to maybe get in this touch earlier to keep it local, to keep it to Canadian. So we definitely hear that frustration on our side for sure.
So we're all here to listen on that, and just that understanding of going through, because I heard this morning $200 million announcement. That doesn't, to me, that means that it'll be foreign investment in here, and it'll be reinvested in the community. That's what I heard today, because I know the financial markets that are happening around us, and that's why our team is in Europe. So I just, at the point from ATB, I know you guys are debt financers, fully understand that, but I think we really have to start looking at how can we build that equity side to get to that risk. But we're not in a computer, we're not building some software program to monitor the field. That's been done. We've been doing it. We have some great stuff that's happened in that province. We've been leaders in a lot of the, land stat analysis and that kind of stuff. But we really got to look at the manufacturing sector, and that's capital intensive. And I think both, not just government, but the whole entire sector has to rethink about how that structure is going to come between the debt and equity. And it really has to be put out there. And this is one of many discussions I've had, both with Protein Investment Canada. By the way, we got a large grant from them, but even so, I don't want to use that grant for foreign investment. I want to use that grant to build a Canadian company. Right? And when we look at all the processing, I know every farmer that's in here is probably selling to an American.
You want to make some summary comments and then we can wrap it up?
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, that's my point.
Okay. Well, good comments, Kevin. Honestly, I think there's many in the room that feel the same way about these challenges. And I think the one very clear takeaway from everybody here is that I think the acknowledgement of that there is a scale-up gap for capital in Canada. There absolutely is. I think everybody on the panel agrees with that, and everybody in the audience, I think, agrees with that. I think the question now that we have to turn our attention to is how do we actually solve that gap and solve it in a timely manner? Time is not on our side. Canada had a 20-year head start in industrial hemp. I think it was about 2 months ago, the U.S. announced $500 million hemp fund specifically focused on scaling up hemp opportunities. When the U.S., I think we all know this, once the U.S. gets behind something, they can move quickly. They can mobilize capital quicker than we can. So I think a lot of people in this room feel that this is really kind of the last chance over the next couple of years to really build a vibrant and robust Canadian hemp sector. But it does require that scale-up capital. So I think that's obviously not something we're going to solve today, but I think from the Alberta Hemp Alliance and board perspective, I think this is clearly what we need to turn our attention to is whether there is a bigger ask, and I know that Manny's already on this, a bigger ask from government to come forward with a solution to support this industry, and putting our heads together collectively as well as figuring out how do we actually make sure that the next time we have this conference that it's at least half full with institutional investors. And that's not something we can blame on the government or the people on the panel. That's something that we have to take on ourselves, is making sure that we do everything we can to reach out and tap into institutional audiences. Anyways, gentlemen, I appreciate all your insights, and thank you for your time.